Welcome to the next episode of the AI Lab podcast from IQ Business. This is Karl-Heinz Wessinger, standing in for Tim Mathis this time around. I've got with me Josh Chettier, as usual, our AI expert at IQ Business. And then we have a special guest, in fact, a returning guest, Johan Steyn. Welcome, Johan. What we'll do today is we want to cover a little bit around AI ethics and governance. I think deep dive a little bit with Johan. He has spent quite a bit of time on this subject, talking to business leaders, consulting on the subject. Johan is a speaker, he's a consultant. He's also the founder for AI for Business. We're very happy to have you here. Johan, we're also keen to understand your advocacy for AI regulation and governance and what you've done with government, with educational institutions. But very excited to have you here today. Maybe, Johan, you want to just kick us off, give us a little bit of background, what you've been up to. You were with us on episode 6. And I'd love for you to jump into AI ethics and governance. What do you think about it in general? Maybe the maturity of ethics and governance in AI in general, and maybe more so in South Africa.
Cool.
Welcome, Johan.
Thank you, Cole and Josh. Thanks for having me back again. Super important topic. A lot has happened over the last year. We had the EU AI Act, a lot of talk about that, probably a framework that most countries will follow, hopefully our country and African countries as well. I think a lot of organizations that I deal with are grappling with this, given that we don't have a legislative framework in South Africa, which is the case in most countries. A lot of the clients I deal with, the banks and the telcos, need to adapt to what the EU AI Act is saying, because they are obviously dealing with European clients. It seems that a lot of clients that I deal with are trying to form their own AI strategy around ethics and anticipating whatever legal framework will come our way. Ethics and philosophy is an important topic when it comes to this technology. It's not just the tech and the technologists and all the bells and whistles and all the large language platforms are coming at us quick at the moment. For me, a simple, maybe a super simple way to think about it is, just because we can do it, should we do it? And that's an interesting question to grapple with, because again, given the lack of a legal framework, we probably can do a heck of a lot with the data. That's outside of POPIA and GDPR and other privacy legislation, but there's a lot we can still do that's not illegal yet, but most likely very wrong. And we can most likely get into those things. I think organizations want to be responsible, not just to show the market and their clients that they're trying to be the good guys. I think that they're realizing more and more how potentially dangerous this technology can be from a reputational damage point of view, environmental damage point of view. But that's why I love these kind of conversations. We will probably end up with more questions than answers, but as long as we're asking the questions and grappling with it together, Cole, that's probably not at all an answer to your question, but I don't know, I'll start with that.
Okay, excellent. I mean, you made reference to the EU AI Act. We actually discussed that in episode 10. I suppose my perspective at that point was it might be a little bit too early to regulate some industries. And maybe just a quick question is, what do you think the role of a regulator should be at this point in time for something like AI? It's relatively new. We could argue that some aspects are probably well covered by other laws already. So does this add anything new? Does it cover a gap that wasn't covered in some other way? Do you think there's something specific that they need to focus on when they look at regulation?
Paul, you're so right. Even in South Africa, we have a number of laws that are somewhat related to AI technologies. I think maybe for me, the biggest worry is when it comes to automated decisioning capabilities, whether it is access to credit, access to healthcare, access to education. If the AI system decides that my son cannot go to college or to high school or to hospital, that's a huge problem. It's close to my skin, so to speak. It's not just that it's a privacy issue, which is already quite serious. But I think our regulatory framework also needs to try and anticipate where this tech is going. A challenge we have is that most of this capability is from the so-called global north. Most of what we do in Africa and who we are is excluded. Our languages, we have more than 3,000 dialects and languages on the African continent, massively unrepresented in chatbots and conversational AI platforms. We also have, and here's an interesting fact, if we think of medical imagery, now there's so much that AI can do when it comes to lung cancer, prostate, breast cancer, etc., trying to compare those scans to millions and millions of scans. But there are nuances in the diseases that we have in Africa that's not covered by that imagery. Um, and if we start uploading images of our scans, where does it go to? To Los Angeles or to Silicon Valley, and who uses that data? So it is tricky, I think, for governments to balance the massive speed at which this tech is moving and to try and put some guardrails on to protect its citizenry. I know we're going to talk about military applications as well, which is such a interesting topic. Look, the regulators are there to protect us. When we started driving cars, why did we get seat belts? Because a number of people died in crashes. And as we know, regulation follows innovation. Currently, I think that gap is increasing rapidly because of how quickly innovation is moving. And do we need a car crash, so to speak, or do we need a huge thing to happen that's really hurting people before regulators from an AI standpoint really start getting to grips of this? They should protect us, but they also should protect our financial well-being in that they can't over-regulate us so we don't compete globally with our other companies and competitors.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. It makes me think, Johan, in terms of evidence-based kind of research that would lead to the regulation, and what case studies or cases might have been considered as part of regulating in industries, specifically now in South Africa as we look at new regulation. And we know that the SA national government had an AI sort of draft paper, that a summit, and they issued a draft paper. It was dated, I think, October 2023. The summit was in April 2024. Interesting 6-month gap between the two. So maybe some consultation on when it should be released, or maybe the developments in AI were just moving so fast that they had to make some further updates before they released it. Where do you think something, or do you think something like that is helpful at this point in time? Is it ready for us to look at adoption of regulation? How did they approach this? What was your view on the government drafting and submitting this paper out into the market?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cole. If we can just backtrack a bit, in October 2020, we had the report on the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. 8 key recommendations. It was a fantastic report. I think it was led by Prof. Tselitsi Mawala, who was at UJ at the time. The work done was really great, but we are now on July 2024, and very little of the recommendations have been implemented. Again, given how quickly this technology is moving, can we spend 2 or 3 or 4 years trying to figure it out? And then, Carl, as you alluded to, we had in October 2023, so 3 years later, the National Draft AI Plan, and then in April of this year at the University of Joburg Business School, there was the National AI Government Summit. I was lucky to have been there as well. That event was actually quite good because the then minister, pre-election, spoke. I was actually dreading it because I thought this was going to be a typical politician talk, but he was really good. He was really informed about what this tech is, what it can do, and so forth. So, look, I don't want to be overcritical, even though the report was really criticized in many of media outlets, and I've also written about it, that it was extremely vague. But at least it's a start. So let's give credit where credit is due. We do need it as a country, but we also need it from an African context point of view, given our socioeconomic situations, given the unemployment in the light of massive automation impacts that we'll see in the next near future. It is very needed. I think it's a little too late, but at least it's a start, So, and that's why I'm part of the working group that we'll talk about as well, because I thought, I can't just keep on criticizing and then when there's finally an opportunity, not participate one way or another. But if we want to be competitive and if we want to educate our children in a way that makes them relevant for the future, we have to start looking at some of these frameworks, but just a bit faster than we are at the moment, I think.
Interesting. The question I have, Johan, and it's something that came across in that initial draft, but perhaps not very strongly. And I'm very interested to see if it comes across stronger in an eventual policy is the separation between generative AI and I guess what I call traditional AI. McKinsey calls it analytical AI, and I think the summit paper called it applied AI. But I think what we mean by that is sort of machine learning, traditional AI, where the goal is to predict or generate a label. You know what I mean? Is it spam, not spam? Is it churning customer, not churning customer? Versus the sort of generative AI, which creates new content that didn't exist before, as far as it being a uniquely generated output. Do you think that these two separate subtypes of AI should be regulated differently, given the fact that there's perhaps a different set of potential risks that can come out of a very sort of narrow, if you compare narrow output range that these traditional models have and a very wide output potential range that these generative models have? Or do you think that some of the bias and risks, societal risks, are shared in common between them? You open up with an example of, you know what I mean, a bank being granted a bank account or not. And that's probably where you'd see something like a traditional AI algorithm over a generative AI algorithm. But certainly the outcomes or the potential for impacting people's lives is there. So just wanted to get your sense of whether we need to treat those separately or the same.
Yeah, look, I think it's worth looking at them to some extent separately, but I think an overarching framework to make sure that whether it is narrow AI or then generative AI or whatever's coming next is covered. Because if we just legislate for the one or even both for now, then, in a year from now, we just need new legislation again. And that's how they're going to have to adapt. But traditional or narrow AI already has the ability to make those automated decisioning or decisions. And again, the biases, in our country, depending on your ethnicity, your age, where you are geographically, I mean, there are so many, whether you're a foreigner, for instance, there are so many factors that can impact the biases in the data sets. I don't think we will ever have a bias-free data set. But as long as we constantly work and retest it to minimize the biases as much as we can. An example I often use is if you would ask me to write an algorithm for a bank to identify potential family units in their, say, 600,000 clients, because maybe the bank wants to promote educational insurance or financing products. My personal worldview is that a family is a man and a woman and a child, which is not wrong, but it's hugely limited. And that's why I always advocate for a multidisciplinary and a diverse core team to be involved in these initiatives. In this example, I need a colleague to tell me, Johan, but what about same-sex couples? What about childless couples? What about single parents and so forth? There's probably 23, 25 different variables on what is a family. And especially given the diversity in our country and the economic diversity, we need to regulate as far as we can all kinds of AI. But you do touch on an interesting point there, Josh, because generative AI, it's the first time that we, as Homo sapiens, who have been creating tools for hundreds of thousands of years, that we are now creating tools that can create their own tools. Which is potentially very scary from a losing control point of view. And if the basics of the biases and the decisioning is wrong, imagine what content generation and even in the cyber physical world, if we think of 3D printing, because right now generative AI is playing largely a role, in my view, in the software development kind of domain, in algorithms and the like. But what if it starts impacting our physical world, our roads, our railways, our ports, the way hospitals are designed, if it's auto-generated, auto-constructed? It's one thing if the algorithms don't work, but if suddenly my house door doesn't open and I need to rush to the hospital with my sick child, and because the generative AI decided it's time to stay indoors. So So maybe to conclude, Josh, I think we need to bring them together. There are more danger with generative AI and whatever is coming next, but I think some of the basic dangers will probably stay the same, and we need to regulate and prepare for that.
Interesting. And a follow up to that, I mean, I actually agree with you on that. It makes complete sense. Perhaps a little bit, and maybe this is a distinction that's arbitrary, but Andrew Ng, or NG as his surname is spelled. Some people might be more familiar with seeing his name spelled out. So he's our data scientist, part of the Google course, started Coursera, part of the early Google machine learning engineers. And so his view is that we shouldn't be regulating the technology. We should be regulating the applications only. So he looks at it as, I mean, the technology is like an electric motor, but the application is putting it in a car or putting it in a plane. Do you think that's a view shared with the community in terms of how the regulations will be approached, very application centric, not technology centric of the foundation models themselves?
Yeah, I don't see any other way, Josh. Look, Andrew, I also struggle with his surname, Ng or Ng, and I love his stuff, his TED Talks, his videos. He's really incredible. I agree with it because how can you regulate the tech? You can only regulate the application. Again, let's go back to the car when we started crashing because we started driving cars and we needed seat belts and maybe which side of the road. You can't regulate whether it's 4 wheels or 5 wheels or what's the size of the engine. It's how we drive and what we do to be safe for us and those other people on the road. That's what you can regulate. We can't regulate how fast AI innovation should happen because that's a ship that sailed and it's an arms race of sorts. Yeah, and also it's to do with our evolutionary progress. We create stuff, we do stuff better, we create new tools. It'll be the end of human civilization if we stop innovating. It's what we do with that neutral tool called AI, using it for good or for bad. That the application should be regulated, and the power of what you can do should be regulated. But again, what distinguishes it from previous tools and previous regulation, because the car will not drive by itself. You can only regulate how the human driver drives it. But now we have cars that drives itself. We have decisioning systems it's almost like more and more of the world we live in is slipping away from human control. And how those decisions are made and what is done with those decisions should be regulated. And that's, again, the weaponization of AI, autonomous weapons, kill decisions made by AI without a military commander involved, credit decisions, healthcare decisions, that should be regulated.
Another thing I did see come across in that initial paper, and you're right to say, I think it did a great job at least sparking that conversation. I mean, not perfect by any means. I mean, I even spotted some grammatical errors, etc., which maybe they could have used ChatGPT to help them come up with that. But I certainly get the sort of initiative that they were trying to express through that paper. One thing that they've both the minister and the paper made clear is that the need to partner between private and public sector. How do you envision that happening? What type of incentives do you think can be offered to the private sector to bring them on board? I just get your view of what would be the best enabler of having that sort of private-public sector partnership in this journey towards sort of an effective AI governance framework.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. It's almost like call it a tripartite alliance. It's government, academia and academic institutions, and then industry, call it practitioners in the field. Just before I get to answer your question, one of my concerns, and I work with a number of our universities, and we absolutely need them, especially from a research and development point of view. My opinion is, from what I've seen so far, is that a lot of the universities who are pushing to have AI hubs and to be very involved, as they should be, there's almost a bit of a land grab between the universities because I think a lot of it has to do with research grants, the publishing of academic papers, And we can't have any land grabs because this tech is for all of us and for our children, and we should have as wide a um, involvement of stakeholders as possible. It cannot just be the academics and writing white papers as much as we need them. What I've sometimes seen from government and academia is a total disconnect with those that I deal with who are working in the field, implementing this technology, because it can be a bit of a kumbaya approach of how great this tech is, and it's just AI, everything. And we who work in the field know that it's still, in many cases, extremely limited. I sometimes tell my clients, just use Excel, man. Don't even look at ChatGPT. If you're not using Excel, don't even look at AI. But how government incentivizes businesses to be involved will be interesting. Is there financial benefit to businesses? Should businesses should we earmark certain experts in the field and give them a grant of sorts to be more full-time involved? That could be an option because obviously in business we're chasing the numbers, we're chasing the revenue, we obviously want the income. And I think a lot of people are willing to, because they're good citizens and they care, they're willing to give X hours a month for this. We probably need a lot more of their involvement, but there must be some sort of an incentive for them to be involved. And maybe just the last thing is a challenging balance is how do we bring in the big international tech companies like the Microsofts and the Googles, because we should not have to reinvent the wheel, but we should also filter what they do and what we can benefit from them through our African and South African perspective. So I think practitioners in our market should get a lot more attention, even though they might be Microsoft or Google experts.
Johan, it makes me think, when you talk about the incentives, have you had any experience with government, I think, trying to address the skills gap? We know, our education system, provides many new, provides learners with an education. We're not going to debate the standard of the education, but they come into the workplace. Many cannot go into potentially a degree or diploma, but now they might seek a job. And I think we know from a business point of view, the biggest issue is probably the skills gap at this point in time. Now we're talking about AI, which is, I suppose, in some ways relatively sophisticated in terms of a skill set. And you mentioned the international companies. Do you know if there's programs underway where either government or universities are starting to either work with large technology partners, introducing them or introducing skills into the South African economy? I think businesses obviously would love to have an incentive, whether that's learnerships, internships, or anything else to bring skills into their businesses, get them trained up and get them ready for this new workplace. What have you seen?
Yeah, Cole, I've seen a lot of initiatives. I mean, for instance, Harambee, I know you guys know them well and have worked with them. Collective X, a lot of the universities as well. A lot of free training being offered by the Googles and the Microsofts of the world. I think the challenge is that it, in my view, is quite fragmented. There's not really an ecosystem that brings all of this together. And there's this balance between technical upskilling and then workplace readiness. And I think there's a huge disconnect for me, that culture of what does it mean to work in a corporate? How do you interview well? How do you get your CV right for recruiters to pay attention? There's a gap there. I think it's probably not isolated to our economy. There are many initiatives. If we can just get them together one way or another. But this also brings me to a topic that needs 5 more episodes, which is our educational system across the world. And if I can just briefly comment on that, because I think more than ever we see how imperfect and unsuitable it is. Our educational system across the world, especially from a primary and secondary point of view, is based on the first industrial revolution, where the focus was on producing factory workers. And a factory worker is a person who does one job the whole day, over and over again. Little room for thinking, critical thinking, innovation, and the like. It's almost just shut up and do your job, assemble the pieces and put it down the assembly line. That's why even today, and I see it with my own 10-year-old and the kind of homework that he's doing. And with this, I'm not saying current education is totally irrelevant. We just should try and make it better, given where the future is going. In the information age, why should I memorize facts and in an exam give it back to prove that I've memorized it to forget it the next day? Because I can just Google it on my phone. I can just chat GPT it or whatever. I think that ability to teach, especially our youngsters, understanding thinking, critical thinking, and the like, is I don't really see it happening in schools. And then in South Africa in particular, even though there's a focus on coding and robotics in our schools, which is not a bad thing. Hungry children don't learn. Most of the children in our schools today haven't eaten yet. So there's also a larger societal problem that we need to address alongside getting us ready for a future of AI. But Carl, I mean, and Josh, we've spoken about this before, and I see it with some of my clients. They are so keen to get skills in because skills are scarce. But even when they get youngsters in who are very sharp coders, data scientists, their work readiness is often so poor that they just fall out within a month or two because they just can't fit into this big corporate kind of world. So there's a lot more that we need to do than just technical upskilling, even though that is incredibly important. But the whole way we educate our youngsters in this country is we need to rethink that. And that's why I say without any shame that I've taught my son to use our Google Home device and ChatGPT to cheat on all his homework, because it's just nonsense that he has to memorize this crap in order to prove in an exam that he can do it. But that's just my view. Josh?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think Carl and I quite recently gave a talk or invited to talk at a I guess a private school of sorts around the use of generative AI in the classroom by teachers, by students, etc. And what was interesting, of course, was the diverse views from different stakeholders from different departments, etc. But quite a number of people positive, quite a number of teachers, I should say, positive about it. And I think it's because they embraced their specific school embraced this thing they call the flipped classroom, where you don't actually memorize facts, or not. And the way instruction and assessment is done is a little bit different, and the classroom is used more to engage with the topic, engage with critical reasoning. The homework's already done. You should have already read the work, etc. But yeah, I mean, I think that, as you say, can definitely be its own couple of episodes. How it's going to be rolled out in education and how that comes into play. My view is that we probably have to get ready for an AI plus human type of curriculum, because trying to separate the two might be a little difficult at this point.
Yeah. Look, I think a challenge is how do we train millions of young kids at a scale where we have not enough teachers. It's a bit of a mass production thing. And so I think we do what we can, especially in our country. It's not like we have to stop it because it's of no value. I would love to see more hyper-personalized education, because we all learn differently. I think, most people I know who work in tech were very poor performers in school and even in university, because we just were bored with the teaching and it didn't accommodate us. So if you ask me right now, how do we change our educational system? I don't quite know, given the realities we're living with. But maybe for you guys, if you haven't heard of or read it yet, a great book that I'm busy with at the moment is by Salman or Sol Khan from the Khan Academy. There's a lot on YouTube about him. He worked with ChatGPT or with OpenAI even before the release of ChatGPT. And one of his newer books is called Brave New Words, How AI Will Revolutionize Education and Why That's a Good Thing. And what I love about that book, he goes head on with should you chat GPT or not in university? Because I think most tertiary educational institutions are grappling with that. And he makes some really, really good points. And it's a brave new words. It's a great book for all of us to read when it comes to education, but also I think upskilling in our own businesses.
I'll definitely check that out. I'm familiar with him. I did see a YouTube video, I think, of him and his son demoing the new ChatGPT 4.0, and it really highlights where personalized education, hyper-personalized education can potentially go with almost like your own tutor who doesn't give you the final answer, but takes you through the reasoning and how do you get there and encourages you on. I think that's a great video for anyone of our listeners who haven't seen it to look that up on YouTube. Just to get back to the sort of national AI strategy. So you mentioned you are part of it. Maybe you can just speak to, I mean, what is your role in it, and who are the diverse range of stakeholders that are being consulted as part of this working group?
Yeah. So it's called the Recommendations Toward the Development of a National AI Strategy Working Group. I think we should figure out an acronym for all of those words, but that's what it's called. And a number of entities are involved: the National Advisory Council on Innovation, or NACI, Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR, Human Sciences Research Council, and the Department of Science and Innovation. So it's a good mix of institutions. Then what it does encourage me is that if I'm not mistaken, it's about 80 or so people currently involved in different work streams, and ranging from government officials, academics, but a lot of practitioners in the field from different organizations. That's encouraging. Yesterday, in fact, on Friday, we've had our second meeting at the CSIR. The work stream I'm involved in is called the Future of Work, and there's others around the data and regulation and a number of work streams. I'm actually quite encouraged by it. Look, it is going to take some time. The idea is that I think by September or October that this initial piece of work is done, and that the forum can give recommendations to cabinet. Again, the fact that it's a diverse group and that practitioners are involved is very encouraging. The conversations we've had recently also encourages me. I think it's a lot of people passionate about our country, about the future of our country. There's no incentive to be involved other than being a good citizen and giving what you can give, which is great. What then will happen once those recommendations are made? I think that's where my concern is. Will it, like after the 4IR report, will it be another 2 or 3 years before we see something happen? That we can't control, but it is very encouraging that such a diverse group is being pulled in, and that as South Africans we're thinking about it. So my view at the moment is I'll be as involved as I can with my limited view and kind of thinking, but and I'm involved as a father, not as an AI person, you know. So rather be part of it than, or otherwise I should just keep my mouth shut and sit on the side and not say anything. I think we should, what I would like to, and I think there are signs that they will increase the group even more as we get going, because I think we need even more diverse views and more people involved, Josh and Cole. So it is encouraging. And I understand that there's protocols and the way government works. There's this committee and then that paper and then this open for consultation and then the government gazette and who knows what. In 3 years from now, large language models will be 1,000 times more powerful than they are now. I don't know if our protocols and white papers and gazettes accommodates the speed at which this technology is changing. So that is a difficult balance. But overall, I think it's positive. Hopefully it will move quickly. And one of the comments that was made in our last meeting, which I really liked, was that we should be measured on not on our activities, because we can have 55 more committee meetings. We should be measured on the outcome. And if, as an example, that little barefoot kid running on the dusty streets of a rural area, if what we do doesn't in some way impact his or her life and future well-being, then what the heck are we doing? We're just having great meetings and having coffee. It's a bit of a harsh view, but I mean, if we're not impacting our children's future, then what the hell are we doing?
Yeah, it's a good perspective, Johan. I'm curious when you mention the stakeholders that are involved, and it's good to hear that it's quite a diverse group. I'm interested as to whether business has quite a strong voice, and whether South Africa does have an opportunity to break the mold a little bit. Considering some of the issues we've had with government service delivery, we've heard about BUSA, for example, Business Unity South Africa, setting up work streams, working with government on things like energy, logistics and transport, which we know are a problem, crime and corruption, which we know are a problem. do you think there might be an opportunity rather than, I suppose, wait for the plan and then try to hope the government implements a plan which could never materialize potentially, that potentially there's a collaboration with business that says, okay, we've got a framework. We need business bodies like BUSA to work closely with government, get business sponsors involved, that are going to put commercial money into these incentives and these schemes, and try to develop something in a faster pace, without maybe necessarily waiting for the regulation, waiting for the plan, but actually trying to help shape the regulation and the outcomes as we go. What do you think?
Carl, I think it's needed. It's probably happening. I honestly I'm not aware of the various initiatives, and it's good that there are various initiatives. Again, as long as we can eventually pull it all together. In the meanwhile, there's a lot we can fix. For instance, our rail network, that's a second industrial revolution problem. We're still struggling with it. Our ports, big problem. Electricity, I'm still not sure what to do with it, given that the election's over and we still don't have load shedding. I don't know what's happening there. I think we're just burning fossil fuels like crazy. I don't think the problem's been fixed. But when it comes to just social service to assist to our citizenry, there are some simple automation, efficiency gains, things that we can do that will really help people. So hopefully there's a lot already happening in the background. Let's bring in the expertise to fix these problems. I mean, an interesting example, a friend of mine a few months back had to start claiming from the unemployment fund. It's now 9 months, nothing. I had to go in 8, 9 times, submit the same documents. And I went with her a few times, the people we actually met with, I actually was sadly surprised but I guess it's a good thing that the people who were helping us were very friendly, proficient. Some of the horror stories I've heard didn't play out, but massive inefficiency. Stuff that we in business have dealt with, just from how to raise an invoice and automate it a bit and to allocate the payment to a statement. So I think there's a lot we can do. And remember this, the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who need 3,000 or 4,000 rand a month from UIF to just buy bread for their kids. This is not many of us potentially, listening to this podcast. If as bad as it is, but if we don't earn something for 3 or 4 months, we probably will not go on holiday this year, but that's how bad it can be. But I'm talking about the bulk of the people in our country. If you don't have water for your kids to clean them, to get them to school, if the bus that takes them to school doesn't work, if the social grants you need doesn't work, this is for most people out there serious stuff. But also, I think there's a lot of room, and hopefully there are already initiatives where business expertise is helping government, and hopefully government is really open for it. Now, the challenge I think with government is that their own procurement cycle and the tendering process, etc., often corrupt. But even if it's not corrupt, it takes months to actually get a service provider on board. And will business engage with them on if there's no monetary involvement or monetary benefit? Probably at some sort of a discount rate. But we also are running businesses with shareholders, so we can't just be kumbayaing and Mother Teresaing. I know it's a kind of a long roundabout question. Hopefully we can find a way to bring in expertise at a monetary agreement that makes sense for the business. And we can contract businesses on an outcome basis like we typically deal with our clients right now to deliver services to government. How it fits how government procures and works, I don't know. Hopefully we can find a way. It's not a super positive answer, but I also want to be realistic in my view, Goal.
Johan, a final one for me is we talked about different groups coming together to tackle this question or tackle the challenge and to see what potential synergies there might be or potential benefits. Recently, what the Minister of Technology and Communications announced was also through the AI Institute of South Africa, sort of AI hub, the 4th AI hub. There's multiple AI hubs being created in partnership with different universities. So this specific one, the 4th one that was added, was the DAIRU, which is the Defense Artificial Intelligence Research Unit. So that's aimed at looking at what potential synergies there can be, benefits in terms of AI research and military application. I found that quite interesting because it would be, according to this article on IT Web, the first in Africa, but of that nature. But also dealing with Microsoft quite a lot. We are a Microsoft AI and data partner, and when one uses Azure, the main Microsoft Cloud platform, it makes it very clear that police and military, the underlying police and military, to use their technology because of the potential it may have in violating individual rights, in violates because of, I mean, it's just as an aside, they've actually had to roll back the sophistication of some of the facial and speech recognition tech because it could actually infer things like emotions and other such attributes. So the fact that South Africa is obviously unashamedly embracing this angle and the potential use of it in the military, what's the downside of this? What's the risk for something like this occurring, or something like this essentially being expanded on?
Yeah, Josh, there was a launch event. I think it was in Simonstown. I was invited 2 days before it, so I had to just pack up and go, which I couldn't. So I wasn't at the event. I don't know if I'm the only one. I don't know why you get invited 2 days before such a big thing. But in any case, it happened. Look, I think there's, from a military point of view, our adversaries, whoever they will be, whether it is other nations or whether it's the like of terrorists, cyber criminals, and others, they are embracing this technology. So, as a sovereign state, our defense entities and our police should also embrace it responsibly, because we've seen many cases across the world, particularly in the US, with facial recognition, different ethnicities being profiled incorrectly and the like. So we need to tread carefully. I think our biggest risk going to the future is cyber war more than physical war. So we need to, and it's probably a military initiative more than anything else. But then there's also things like natural disasters, flooding, earthquakes, and the like, where our military should be very involved. Could we use AI to predict natural disasters due to weather patterns? Could we be better at predicting national riots and uprising due to chat on social media, on WhatsApp and the like, and then prepare our military to protect its citizenry? So I think there's also there's a defense and a protection aspect to it, and then there's also the adversarial, kind of call it attack aspect to it. As an example, from a military point of view, the war in the Ukraine at the moment is the first war where we have autonomous agencies fighting each other. Typically, if we think of drones, in the past, a drone would, through facial recognition, identify a potential adversary, send the data to a human commander who would make that decision to launch the missile. Now that decision is the drones and the algorithms, and the drones are fighting each other. So I think we need to think carefully about it. I think it's good that our military is looking at it. We need to do it right. But I think the use cases are more about protecting our citizens rather than how could we better attack nations next to us or something like that. It's a good thing. We just need to do it right and careful, and not just let the drones loose to quell an uprising in KZN or something like that. That will be a disaster.
Excellent. Thanks, Jan. And that was a bit of a look into the darker side of AI and ethics. It probably requires a whole episode to consider, what leeway should the military have, or the military applications of AI. We're going to wrap it for today. I mean, if I had to think about the conversation, it sounds like it's really good and positive that the South African government has taken a step towards putting a working group together. And Johan, we'd love to have you back at some point. Tell us more about how the working group is progressing and what developments we can expect. It sounds like one of the next phases is potentially to test some test cases, and obviously have some educational institutions involved in that. The plan is being formed and being set, and I suppose there's an intent, and I think that's a positive outcome. The field of ethics and governance obviously requires much more development, maturity, not just locally, but also internationally. I think we'd really value more of your input, Johan. But I think we should close out, and thank you again very much for coming to the podcast. Thanks, Josh. And thanks to our listeners. Hope you'll all be back for the next episode.